Kpaceguy here with the fresh haircut. What's going on, YouTube? Today we're going to talk about how to set up crossover. And I know in previous videos I kind of hinted on it and talked about crossover a little bit, but I want to go ahead and make a dedicated video on crossover because I found that it's very important to get this setting correct. This can play a big part in whether your sound sounds good or it sounds great. And so we're going to talk about crossover, how to set it up, what it is, and how to get the best performance out of your system. So what is crossover? Crossover is the frequency at which your speakers start to roll off and the subwoofer takes over. So my floor standard there may play a certain frequency and then slowly starts to roll off and hand it to the subwoofer. Now most receivers have their own respective calibration that will record data in the room and set your speakers either to large, which are usually floor standards, or small, which are usually bookshelves or satellites, and attempt to give you the best crossover for the speakers in the room. Now on the screen here I have Yamaha's Y-PAL, and that's where I'll be getting my crossovers from. Most people will leave these settings as is, and a lot of times you'll be okay with them. But if you really want to tweak your system and to make it sound as best as you can, there are ways to set your crossover that can really help your sound. The first step in finding your correct crossover is to find out what your speaker's frequency response is. So my polka-dot LSIMs, they get down to 20 Hz all the way up to 40,000 Hz. And that's how I know where I can find it. The frequency response is how low a speaker can play all the way up to how high. And you should be able to find this in the specifications of your manual or straight from the manufacturer's site, just like I did here. It's not as important to know your subwoofer frequency response because most subwoofers stop at around 200 Hz and go between maybe 20 to 30 Hz on average. Head into your receiver settings where you can select the crossover. When using your receiver for setting crossover, you want to turn your subwoofer's crossover off, and you do so by either turning it to its highest frequency or putting it in LFE mode, meaning you're bypassing the subwoofer's crossover and using the receiver's crossover settings instead. You don't want to use both or you'll run into issues around that crossover point. If your speakers are set to large, you're telling your receiver that your speakers are full range and to feed them all frequencies. And even though this may be true or may not be true, you still want to set them to small in order to change the crossover. So for example here, I have my front set to small. If I change them to large, I then disable my ability to change the crossover at all, and it's going to play all the frequencies possible. Now my floor standards are really big and they can handle that much. But there's issues when you run all your speakers at large and you can't control the frequency crossover if you don't have them on small. You also want them set to small because you get the best sound when paired with a subwoofer. The most common crossover is at 80 Hz, but you may find better results depending on your speakers and room acoustics. A great reference for setting your speaker crossover is to set them 10 Hz above the lowest frequency response they can handle cleanly. So for example, again, my speakers got down to 20 Hz. So if that was true, I would bump it up to 30 Hz as my crossover to get it cleanly playing. Typically a floor standing speaker with 8-inch drivers or higher can handle 40 Hz or full range. Towers with 4 to 6-inch drivers handle around 60 Hz. Large centers and bookshelves can handle around 60 to 80 Hz region. Smaller centers and surrounds like to play around that 80 to 100 Hz, and satellites and on-wall speakers like to hang around the 150 to 200 Hz. Just a small rule of thumb, but doesn't always apply. For me, I find 60 Hz to be the best fitting for me with my towers and 80 Hz for everything else, regardless of the fact my speakers can get incredibly low. I've even set them as high as 120 Hz and the subwoofer sounded smoother. So it's going to be up to your ears and what you're looking for out of your system. So in front of you right now, I have my front speaker set to 110 Hz. So anything underneath that, my subwoofers are going to pick up. And then everything else is around 80 Hz, and then my surround bookshelves are at 60. So what I would actually go back and do now is I would keep my floor standards at 100, maybe a little bit lower. I'll put them as 100 because I think that's what they really would play smoothly with. And then I would go through and set everything pretty much similar to it. So everything under 100 Hz is going to go straight to the subwoofer. So none of my speakers are going to play anything lower than 100 Hz. And that's that crossover point. So anything around that 90 to 100 Hz area, the speaker is going to send that information over to the subwoofer, and then anything 100 hertz and higher is going to go back to the speakers themselves. So right now all my speakers are set to small, which allows me to control that crossover point. If I was to set this to large, I can no longer do that. My receiver is now thinking, okay, you have really strong speakers, I'll send all the information their way. If you set them to small, you can still get most of the information that you want, but not all of it, which will do a couple things for you. One, you're not going to send any signals to your speakers that they can't handle, so you're going to alleviate any stress you may put on them. The second thing you're really going to do for your speakers is be able to turn them up louder. So when you get a good crossover frequency or a crossover point, what you're now doing is allowing your speakers to handle more power, so you can turn that volume up a little bit more. Now if you're sending them information that's too low, that's going to really harm them, you can't turn your speakers up that high because you're going to risk blowing them or burning the coil or just anything that damages the speakers, keeping them up. You don't want any heat to get into the speaker, you don't want any damaging issues. So when you cross over your speakers, you also elongate their lifespan. So you really want to go in and get your crossover correct. So for me personally, a lot of people may ask, hey, if you set your crossover so high in your speakers, what's the point of having such big speakers? You're not even utilizing, a lot of their attributes and a lot of their abilities. And I, to some point, agree. But again, you don't want your speakers doing too much more than they can handle, and you want to be able to turn your system as loud as you want it without having any power handling issues. But for me personally, I think 100 hertz is too high just for the speakers that I have. So what I would personally do is go back in here, I'll go to my front speakers, and I would probably put them around 90 or so, and then let my subwoofer take over. And then I would set everything else probably around that area as well. So anything 90 hertz and below, I can let my subwoofer take care of it. Now, there are special times in movies where you can get LFE bass tracks into your subwoofer that are higher than 120 hertz or so. Sometimes the audio engineers put in different type of decodings that allow the subwoofer to play at higher frequencies. So usually you think of a subwoofer playing around 30, 40, 50 hertz. But sometimes in a certain movie at a certain point, you need your subwoofers to play at maybe 120 or 110, or just to give you extra emphasis and oomph in that certain scene. So a lot of people will actually cross over their speakers a little bit higher around that 100, 110, 120 hertz area so that your subwoofers still receive that information. For me personally, I'm going to let my 4-center speakers handle that because they are way too powerful to cut them off too high. So we're going to keep it on 90, and we're going to talk about how to figure out if that's correct for you. So once you set up your crossover and you think you got everything dialed in, what are you listening for? Once you think you have your crossover set, it's time to take a listen. I like to use music and frequency sweep to test my crossover. If you're going to use music, use a song that demonstrates lows and mids, and listen for a smooth transition between speakers and subwoofer. If you can localize your subs, meaning hear where they are in the room, then they may be too high. If you hear a big increase in volume around the crossover frequency, with this case being 90 hertz, try adjusting the volume level of your subs to match the output of your mains. And you'll do that in the same menu that you were in your crossover. So down here I can go to level, and let's say my front left speaker and my subwoofers were not matching in level. I can come here and change my decibel level to further balance that sound out. If you're using movies to test your crossover, I recommend using a movie that includes vocals with both male and female voices. In the male voice, your subwoofer should not be playing these frequencies unless you have maybe like a demon voice or a dragon or something with a really deep voice, but a standard human voice should not be playing through your subwoofer. You will hear a bloated, muffled sound with vocal reproduction if your subwoofer is crossed too high. The center channel should be sufficient enough to handle the vocals. That's what all the center channel is made for, is just complete vocal. That's 50% of the video you're going to be watching. Female voices should sound like, well, female voices. The mid-range driver should be able to handle that just fine. If someone coughs, knocks on the door, or bounces a basketball and your subwoofer picks those frequencies up, your crossover isn't quite right yet. Of course, there are movies that break these rules, but not all movies, so if you're hearing consistent bloatiness and muffling of voices across different music and movie genres, then it's your crossover point. So guys, I can't stress enough how important it is to get your crossover right. It plays a difference in your overall sound. Some people may be saying, I don't have a lot of bass. Why don't I have a lot of bass? And that may be because you're sending the information to the wrong place. Some people have really big, really powerful towers, and they want to run them full range, and that's good and all, but bass from a subwoofer, a dedicated subwoofer, sounds much different than bass from a big floor stander. You're going to find the bass to be more controlled, more powerful, more output through a subwoofer made for those kind of frequencies. Even though your floor standard speakers may say 35 Hz, 31 Hz, 41 Hz, 42 Hz, you don't want to feed them all the way down there because they're going to roll off pretty quickly at that point. You want your subwoofers to take care of, the meat and bones of the bass notes so that your floor standers and your bookshelves and your satellites can breathe and do what they're supposed to do. When you power your speakers up and you have a wrong crossover point and you turn it up really, really loud, you start to introduce distortion in your sound. And that could be a result of a popping noise, it could be a crackling noise, it could be a raspy noise, and just a lot of different motor noises that come from speakers when they're working too hard. So you really want to get your crossover point correct because it's going to change your quality of sound, it's going to change your blend, it's going to change your bass response and the smoothness and accuracy of it. And it's also going to elongate your speaker's lifespan. If you're planning on having your speakers for a long time, you're going to want to power them sufficiently and give them what they're supposed to have and nothing more. So guys, I hope this video helped you out just a little bit. You can never get this right completely. Sit down, listen, try to do your best to take note of what you're listening to and what sounds best in your room, and ask questions. A lot of us here on YouTube know a lot to help you out. A lot of the comments know how to help you out. So if you're still confused and you need help with crossover, just leave a comment down below in the comment section. I and 1,000 other people are going to help you out, I promise. You'll get to answers, you can get to questions answered, I promise. So I hope this helped you out just a little bit. Make sure you go into settings, even if you're a pretty proficient person as far as home theater goes and getting things taken care of. Go back and double check your work. I have my settings in my system set for several months, and I went back not too long ago and actually realized that I had them wrong. So go back in there and take a listen. Even if you think they're right, kind of tamper with it. You may find a better setting that you didn't once know that was better. So take a look at that, get your levels right, get your crossover right. If you guys have any more questions, leave a comment down below, and you guys know that I and 1,000 other of my subscribers and viewers will help you out. So if you found this video helpful, leave me a comment down below, let me know that. Also smack that like button if you appreciate this video, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Kpaceguy out.